Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everybody. It's your host, Wendy McCallum, and I am back today with my favorite guest and my buddy, Sarah Baillie. I've got Dr. Sarah Baillie here again. I hope that you have listened to our past conversations together on this podcast. If you haven't, after you listen to this one, my guess is you're going to want to go back and find those. We've done 2 different podcasts in relation to burnout. One where we focused in on the naturopathic kind of side of burnout, which is adrenal fatigue. One where we talked about strategies for preventing burnout or recovering from burnout if you feel like you're in it. You know, there are many of you who are listening to this podcast who are feeling completely exhausted and depleted. And, you know, there's a pretty good chance that you are headed towards burnout or maybe even in it. So I really encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes. We also have done a couple of, I think 2 or 3, maybe 3 really great episodes in relation to perimenopause and menopause and hormones. And those are the podcast episodes that I get the most feedback on, hands down. I hear from people all the time that they love the podcast where we talk about women's hormones and have a really honest, candid conversation about, you know, what's going on with us and our experiences, both personally as women going through perimenopause and menopause, and also with the clients and patients for Sarah that we work with. So this is another hormonal episode, and it's a good one because yippee! Today, Sarah and I are celebrating our joint Menoversary. So we are both we're very close. We're recording this a little bit in advance. We're relying on the faith filter here that we're going to get through the next couple of weeks without both of us getting our periods. But we are both almost at the 12-month mark of not having any menses. So we wanted to do this episode to kind of mark that because we've been talking about our respective journeys on each of the episodes that we've done. So welcome back, Sarah.
Hi, good to be here. And just to correct you, today is actually the Menoversary day for me.
Oh my God. I thought it was that. Why did I think it was the 29th? Okay.
I don't know. Today I went back and I looked in the tracker and today is the day.
Okay. Wow. Well, this is really exciting. Yeah. We're actually celebrating Sarah's actual Menoversary today. I should have made a cake. We should have made a cake and we should sing the song.
Is there a song?
To you. Happy Menoversary to you.
Oh my God, please.
Happy Menoversary, dear Sarah. Happy Menoversary to you. And I cannot believe I just sang on the podcast. There's a pretty
I can't believe that either.
I might edit that out. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how bad it sounds. Okay, so mine is May 1st and yours is April. Today is April 16th, right? So yours is 2 weeks before mine. And how old are you, Sarah?
I'll be 52 in July.
Okay. And I'll be 50 in August. So again, we're a great example of the fact that this happens at different times for different people. And both of us are kind of, I think, in the most typical range to go into full menopause.
Yeah.
But some women go in a lot earlier, either naturally or because they have had like a hysterectomy, for example, right?
Yeah. Hysterectomy, chemotherapy, those are the 2 sort of biggest reasons why people would go into menopause beforehand. Or something called premature ovarian insufficiency, which is another topic entirely.
Right. Okay. And then some women go in later. So there'll be some women who continue to get periods through their 50s, right?
Yeah. I've got patients who are 57 who are still having periods.
I didn't do any official introduction of Sarah. If this is the first time that you've heard Sarah talking, Sarah's a naturopathic doctor at Halifax Naturopathic. And I, for a time, worked at Halifax Naturopathic doing some nutritional coaching. And that is how I met Sarah. And then we reconnected last year and we've actually become pretty good friends. We've bonded over our lack of estrogen.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So what we want to do today is, I'm going to start with you, Sarah, because it's your actual Menoversary. So you definitely are the guest of honor and you should go first. I just thought maybe we could kind of tell our, just kind of generally our experience through perimenopause and menopause. Obviously, as we've talked about in other podcast episodes, it's very different for every woman, but there are a lot of commonalities in terms of things that women experience and some common symptoms and emotions and that kind of thing. And so I thought it would be maybe interesting for the listeners to hear you tell your story with perimenopause and menopause, and then I will attempt to do the same, although mine is definitely a moving target right now. So
Right.
when did you first start experiencing noticeable signs of perimenopause? And did you know when you were experiencing them that that's what it was? I would think that because you know all about this, I mean, this is really your area of expertise, women's hormones, as a naturopathic doctor, that you would have been more likely to actually be able to say, oh, this is probably hormonal, than the average woman who has no idea what's going on.
Well, actually, you'd think that, but when you're in it, it's kind of a horse of a different color, really. I had children at 39 and 41, which meant that when I actually, looking back, when I started to experience perimenopausal symptoms, they were really mixed in with having toddlers.
Right.
And having, I had a kid who woke up at 5:20 every morning, regardless of what we did. So, constantly sleep deprived anyways, getting up in the middle of the night with sick kids or kids who weren't sleeping. So it was very difficult for me to assess how I was doing. And then, your periods change after having a baby often. And I was an older mom, so my periods definitely changed. They became, shorter, the length of flow was shorter in duration, but super heavy for a couple of days. And so, I was kind of in perimenopause, but also in the few years after having babies, which is kind of chaotic anyways. And so trying to sort of patch together what was going on was challenging because I was just burnt out and tired and I didn't know what was going on. I think for me, the first time I realized I was actually in perimenopause was a mood thing. And I can't remember if I talked about this on another episode, but I remember waking up one morning and thinking, oh my God, I have to get out of here. Now, that I'll set the context. I have a happy marriage. I have a stable home life. I'm very fortunate in all those ways. And I woke up and thought, I'm leaving all of these people because, and it was visceral. It was so strong, that feeling like, what have I done? And it was nothing conscious. Well, now I see it was hormonal, and I just wanted to run away. Like I was packing my bags in my head and trying to figure out how I was going to do this. And this is like on waking one morning. And then the next day I got my period. I mean, I made it through the day and, obviously I didn't leave, and the next day I got my period and I was like, holy fuck, excuse my language, but I was just, the response was so strong. And then I could see in hindsight that I'd been feeling a little agitated, and I kind of, before my period, and then the period came, and then I felt better. I felt normal. I felt like, yeah, sure, I've got a crazy life, midlife mother with 2 young kids, but, and then it happened again the next month. And I had a remedy, actually I had a homeopathic remedy that really helped me through it the next time. But that's when I realized, like, oh, because I had all this other stuff going on and I couldn't really pinpoint the fact that I was perimenopausal or not, that was a very clear indication for me that it was a significant mood shift. And then I recognized, I was able to look back and go, oh, so for the last number of months, maybe a couple of years, my PMS mood changes have been significant, but I just had been chalking it up to being tired and having children, frankly, and trying to work and do all the things that come along with having kids. So once I was able to see that, I realized, oh, okay, so now I actually have to start managing this. And I, my sleep wasn't great, but my sleep wasn't great because I also still had young kids.
Yeah.
So
like a couple of things with this. First of all, there'd be lots of women who would find themselves in that situation. I mean, my kids were, they weren't old when I would have gone into perimenopause. I mean, I had my kids when I was 32. And so, my kids would have been 8 when I was 40. So they were still little enough that they were not, they were waking up with nightmares in the middle of the night and all of that stuff. But I'm thinking anyone who had their children, and I was considered to be kind of like, I would have been in the mean age, if that's the right statistical term, for having kids at that time, like at that time period in time. Most women were having their kids around like 30-ish, they're young, low 30s. But lots of my friends had their kids or had their second or third child in their late 30s. And so there would be lots of women who would for whom it would be very difficult to even know that they were having any symptoms because they were up in the middle of the night with kids all the time and sleep deprived and all the rest. So that's really interesting to me. And then the other piece of it, as you were talking, is, that whole like the wild thought about packing your bags and just ditching everybody brings me back to that conversation that we had, I think, in the very first episode of this podcast, which remains one of the most popular episodes of this podcast, by the way, where we talked about estrogen as the nurturing hormone. And you said, when that is low, effectively, we don't want to nurture anymore. And I wonder, I don't know what happens to your hormones right before your period, but
they drop.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Significant drop.
Yeah. So that makes sense, right? You're probably in an estrogen dip, when you're ready to ditch your kids. And then the third little piece that I thought we could maybe focus on for a second is this, is the fact that your periods were getting, the time between your periods was getting shorter and you're having heavier flow for a shorter period of time. And I think that that's something I definitely, in hindsight, that happened to me. Is that something that's relatively common for women in perimenopause?
Yeah, so they can either, so the time between periods can lengthen or shorten. And then the kind of flow changes often. So sometimes it just peters out. And for other women, it's super heavy. Right. And then we have to, make sure that they're not becoming anemic and, all the things that come along with that. But the thing that I did want to mention just about having, I reference it because I have kids and, so lots of my patients have kids, but then I also have lots of patients who don't. Right. And they also, what happens in that situation is the fact that midlife kind of perimenopause beginning often gets blamed on stress. Right. And stress can be a component that's impacting it for sure. But it's because it's kind of sneaky. It's not like you just wake up one morning and you get a phone call saying, you're down in perimenopause, by the way. It just kind of like lots of women are in my office saying, well, I haven't slept, but I've had all these stressors going on, or I haven't been, I haven't had as much energy, or my periods are kind of off. And I just thought it was stress or fatigue or the fact that I've been traveling for work or, and so it's not the go-to. It's not the first thing that women think of. The first thing they think of is stress or stressing kids. Those are kind of the...
Well, yeah, of course. And because this is, as we talked about in the burnout episodes, I mean, this is like the perfect storm for women. Your late 30s into your 40s, that decade is really a tough decade for a lot of women, whether you have kids or not, because it is when all the responsibilities kind of peak, I think, for women. You're reaching the pinnacle of your career. So you've moved yourself up through your 30s or 40s. And for a lot of women who do have kids, 30s are almost like there's a little bit of a pause happening there in terms of their ability to move up the ladder, let's say, in the business or, whatever their profession is. And then they feel this pressure or a desire, frankly, which we also talked about, how that creative energy that we were putting out towards everyone else starts to turn back in as our hormones shift. And so women tend to want to pick up more responsibilities or do different things or explore, different stuff in their 40s. And then what we end up with is this kind of perfect storm of incredible pressure and responsibility, which leads to an increased rate of burnout for women who are in their perimenopausal years. So this is a common thing. And the symptoms of stress mimic in many ways the symptoms of perimenopause. There's lots of overlap there. And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about you're having your kids late and the confusion that can happen with the symptoms postpartum is the only other time in my life when I had night sweats was after I had my daughter.
Right.
So I had all these same types of symptoms that I'm having now for about, I don't know, maybe a year after I had my daughter. And my thyroid burnt out because I was exhausted and depleted. So I basically went into burnout as well after that. So I guess it's just, I'm just kind of focusing in on this because I'm having a bit of an epiphany here that there's really a lot of overlap in the symptoms
There is.
postpartum and the
Yeah.
symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. So if
Yeah.
you happen to be doing both of those things postpartum in perimenopause, it would be very hard to discern what's what and what's going
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your journey like after? So after you had your, I hate the word journey, by the way. I don't know what else to use. Do you have a better word for journey, Sarah?
Oh, not off the top of my head.
I know.
What was your experience? You can use experience. Yeah.
Let's
So
use
what did it look like? What did it look like?
Experience. Yeah, what did it look like?
So I stopped wanting to run away. I mean, not all the time, frankly, but it was never that acute because I figured it out. And the minute I would start feeling, and I also started treating myself in the second half of my cycle for low progesterone. Because I was having some symptoms of estrogen dominance. And then I could actually see that I wasn't balanced in that second half, and it was starting to make me super irritable. And I just thought I was irritable because I had kids. Like, I just thought those two things went together. And I mean, I think they do to some degree, but I was like super irritable. Anyway, so I started treating that a little bit and started recognizing like, oh, I'm a little bit more stable. Okay, that's good. And then I don't know that I thought about it for a couple of years because I just had kind of a routine happening. And then things started to change again. And so I had to kind of do what I do with my patients, which is hormone chase. I had to kind of try and figure out what was happening based on what symptoms I was having. And that my sleep kind of started to be affected maybe, like 3 or 4 years ago, I would say, significantly. And then I had to change what I was doing and had to focus on getting more sleep. And frankly, I still wake up once a night with a hot flash. But once is better than 10 times, right? So I'm okay with that right now. What happened for me, interestingly, is that I went to, about 2 years ago, I had gone 5 months without a period. And then I went into a stressful situation where I was caring for my mom who's had some surgery, and it was kind of 2 months of a lot of stress, and my period came back, and I was really surprised. It's like the shift in hormones, and it could have been coincidental, but my period came back for 2 or 3 months, and then it went away again for another 5 or 6 months. And then when COVID lockdown hit, I got another period. That was my last period. And those 6 weeks of very intense stress here when we, everybody experienced it, but for us, like April 16th would have been exactly a month after we went into lockdown last year.
Yeah.
And that's when I got my last period. So stress can inhibit your period, but it also seems to have brought it on in both of these cases.
Well, interestingly, for me, it was the opposite, right? So
right.
I'm going to tell my whole story, but at the end of my perimenopause experience, I was having my periods every month. Maybe I would miss one cycle, but I didn't have any long stretches without my period. And then all of a sudden, May 1st, last period. Yeah, and I plunged into full menopause, as you know, like just boom, all of a sudden. And it was an intensely stressful time for me too, obviously, because of the pandemic and everything that went with that. So it's interesting how stress can have both of those effects. It's interesting. Okay. So your last period was April 16th. And what has the last year been like for you without periods? Did you notice a shift in symptoms and how you were feeling?
So the biggest change that I can describe is that there's a relative state of calm that I can't really articulate. Somebody asked me this last night, and it's hard to actually put words to it because it's physiological. So it doesn't feel emotional. I mean, I still have lots of stressors in my life, and I still have, the things that, keep us up and down through the day. And but there is there's a flattening of what I would describe as the roller coaster. And for the first podcast we did attach that graph that I like to show patients. But it really does feel like a sort of glassy sea as opposed to a rocky one. And it feels predictable. It feels like this part of my life now is not going to govern how I'm feeling emotionally. Now, that's not the case for everybody.
Yeah.
I have to say there are women who postmenopausally experience depression. There's some anxiety. Those are all possibilities. For me, I'm not sure that that's effective. I feel like there's some sort of flattening of something. And it's, again, like it's very hard to articulate because it's just, it's like almost, it's cellular. Right?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. What you're saying right now totally resonates with me, and I can't articulate it for people either. I've tried. It's a weird thing, but it's like, I just feel, I say it's like I came down a level and I'm like, my feet are on the ground again. That's kind of how it feels like to me. And yes, there's lots of unpredictable stuff still happening and stress and all the rest, but I just feel like I'm 1 or 2 levels down in terms of that. Maybe, I don't know, anxiety is probably not the right word for me, but just, yeah, it's just calm. I'm just calmer generally. Yeah. Yeah.
I just feel less at the whim of something else.
Yeah. That's a good way.
But I would never have described myself as being at the whim of something beforehand. Like I never really sort of thought I'm at the whim of my hormones, and yet totally was.
Yeah. Well, you don't know until you're out of it. You don't know what you were in. I mean, it's almost impossible to know that. It just feels like this is just normal and this is how it's always going to be until it's not that way anymore. So for the last, so generally speaking now, what kind of symptoms, do you have any symptoms that you identify or attribute to your hormones having, because again, in menopause, what happens is your hormones basically, they come down and they kind of flatline there. So have you noticed anything different in terms of symptoms in the last few months?
So I actually haven't noticed that much. Less. So I used to have some breast tenderness that would come and go, and I think I have less of that. I do surprisingly still have some, and I expect that for the next year or so, that kind of comes and goes. Sometimes it's related to the amount of decaf that I've drunk, frankly, because coffee can affect breast tenderness, which is a fun fact.
Without, has nothing to do with caffeine?
Yeah, well, it has to do with something called methylxanthine, and methylxanthine is caffeine is one, but there are other components of coffee that are also methylxanthines.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's from what I understand. I'm now questioning that, like, is that true? Anyways.
Go do your own research, people.
Yeah. So my experience is that if I drink too much decaf, then my breasts get tender. So I've still got a little bit of that. I am still having night sweats and occasional hot flashes, depending on, like, my body temperature is just a little bit raised as well. So particularly in the morning. So I might not be having a hot flash, but I might leave the house on a cold morning without a coat, and then 5 o'clock be like, what the hell was I thinking? Right. I go to leave the office and it's freezing cold out. So there's that. And then, as I said, I'm not really waking in the middle of the night so much with a hot flash, but my waking hot flash will be like at 6 o'clock or, and so I'll be like, okay, now I'm awake. Sometimes I can go back to sleep, but I just choose not to for the most part. And then there was just one other thing that I thought, so this is really interesting for me, because as a practitioner, sometimes you're just completely blind to what's happening inside your own body, and often your kids, unfortunately, because you're just like, it's just this. But I've had 2 injuries that haven't healed well in the last 2 years. One is a tailbone injury and one is a foot injury, and they're probably both tendon related, although the foot is definitely tendon related. And it never occurred to me until about 2 or 3 months ago that the reason why my foot is not healing, no matter what I do, may be related to lack of estrogen. I may have been able to pick that up in a patient, but I certainly couldn't pick it up in myself, because I was thinking, it's this injury and why won't it get better? And, trying different therapies to do that, physio and whatnot. And it just wouldn't get better. And so that was a revelation for me, because I thought, well, I do see women with joint pain and sort of tendon and ligament pain and achiness postmenopausally when the estrogen's really low, but I'd never attributed it to myself.
Right.
And so I may consider the idea of trying some hormone replacement if it persists.
Right. When you're talking about hormone therapy, I think to be clear, you're talking about bioidentical hormone therapy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So that my experience in perimenopause was really that I had no idea that any of the stuff that was going on might be related to hormones until I started working with Dr. Jen Sleep-Huber, who has been on this podcast talking about intuitive eating a couple of times. She's also a naturopath. I was working at her clinic for a little while, just doing like a day a week or something at her clinic, started to get to know her, started talking to her about menopause and perimenopause. And then we decided to do we ran a small program together for a year or two. And in the process of that, I learned a lot about perimenopause. And it became clear to me that many of the things that had been happening to me in my early 40s, mid 40s were probably hormonally connected. And I just didn't know it. So, the biggest symptom for me was, I really think I got off pretty scot-free in perimenopause, to be perfectly honest. I had pretty regular periods up until the year before I went into full menopause. I was not on birth controls. I wasn't using anything to regulate those. They were just kind of naturally happening fairly regularly and reliably. I didn't have I had heavier bleeding, but not the kind of bleeding that some women have that's just, really, really heavy and prolonged. I didn't have any of that. But what I did have was something I talked to Jen about actually on the last episode. She gave us a great explanation of meno rage and how that happens and the connection with estrogen and the amygdala, which was fascinating to me. But I had meno rage, which I describe as an out of body, uncontrollable anger that comes out of nowhere and is completely, unexpected and unpredictable and is embarrassing, because you just feel like you can't control it. You can tell it's happening. It's like you're watching yourself and it's out of proportion to whatever the trigger was, but you just can't seem to calm yourself down and stop it. And that happened a lot for me. And it was really off-putting and upsetting for me because I felt out of control, and I don't like the feeling of being out of control. I consider myself to be pretty person with a fair bit of self-control. And it was just wild, and my kids were making fun of me, and my husband, sometimes he'd just start laughing in the middle of it, which of course would just make it 10 times worse. Right. I just get I just yell even more, and then afterwards I would always apologize. I would always, and eventually after I started talking to Jen, I realized, oh, this is hormonal. That's what's happening here. And, that just the mere fact of understanding that it was hormonal was huge for me. I'm sure it was for you when you realized, oh, wait a second, this wanting to ditch my family and run away, is not a reflection of my love and dedication to my kids. For me, just sometimes having the information is just so empowering, which is of course the reason why you and I are talking about this so much. It's because we want women to get this information, because nobody is talking about this stuff. So for the meno rage, for me, finding out that this was probably connected to hormones was really, really helpful. I continued to have the meno rage. And I could tell so many stories about the ridiculous things that I lost my mind over. One of which actually involved Jen Sleep-Huber, when my husband accidentally sold the American Girl doll clothes that were supposed to go to Jen's daughter for her birthday. We were selling all this stuff on Kijiji, and my husband sold them to the wrong guy. And then I got home and all the clothes that Jen Sleep-Huber had picked out for her daughter for her birthday were gone to some stranger on Kijiji. And I literally lost my ever-loving meno mind. It was so crazy. And then I had to call Jen and tell her that her clothes got sold. I said, when I remember talking to her and saying, the funniest thing, Jen, about all of this is that I just raged on Rob about this, mistake that he made. Really just trying to help out, and he totally botched it up. And she was because she understands this, because this is, what she does, because she's perimenopausal herself, she was so nice about the whole thing, didn't care, got some different clothes. It was all good. But anyway, that kind of thing happened over and over during perimenopause. And that was, I think, my biggest symptom. The other thing that I used to have is I used to get night sweats a couple of nights before my period. So I would get really, really hot right before my period. And I had a couple nights of really terrible sleep. And once I figured out the pattern there, as I take my sweater off, because I'm currently extremely hot, brought to you by Menopause. For those of you not watching, I just took my sweater off. So that was happening a couple of nights before my period. And when I figured out that pattern, that was really helpful, because I realized, okay, well, this is hormonal as well. Interestingly, though, as I have talked about on this podcast many times before, I had gotten to a place where I wasn't happy with my relationship with alcohol. I felt like I was drinking far too much and far too often. I felt like it was hard for me to not drink, and I didn't like that. I didn't like all of the, repercussions that it was having for me personally. And I made the decision to try to stop drinking, and I did. So about 3+ years ago, I gave up alcohol altogether, and those night sweats disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So for the last 3 years of perimenopause, or 2.5 years or so of perimenopause, I didn't have any of those night sweats. It was amazing. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling with night sweats during perimenopause or even menopause, I am like a great example, like real life example of the impact of alcohol as a trigger. What is it, Sarah? A vasodilator? What's the deal with it?
Yeah, vasodilator. And it also, red wine in particular releases histamine, which then vasodilates. That's why you get red cheeks.
Right.
That also is a thing for me. I do like a glass of red wine once in a while, and I don't feel like I have a problem with alcohol. And so occasionally I'd like to have some red wine. I can't do that anymore. I just, I can choose to. This is what I talk to my patients about. It's like, if then you can make the choice, right? And so I rarely make that choice anymore, because I know that my night is going to be terrible.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah. And listen, you know what? It's probably worth it for a while for women, it's probably worth it. But I think we all get, not all, but like some of us get to a point where, we think, well, wait a second, is this really worth it anymore? And would it be worth it to me to sleep? And I mean, that's what happened to me with caffeine last year. As I have talked about on this podcast, I am now completely caffeine free, thanks to Sarah, who made me stop drinking coffee. But it's, I now know that that's not one of the things that's causing the stuff that I'm struggling with, which is empowering to me. It's empowering to control the pieces you can control when so much of this feels really foreign and out of your control.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what happened with me, really. That was my perimenopause, nothing really remarkable. And then of course, last May, and I didn't know this was happening. I mean, this is the thing with menopause, right? You don't know you're in menopause until you haven't had a period for 12 months. And so in May, I just thought I had skipped a period last year. And then I didn't get a period in April. And then that's backwards. May, June, I didn't get a period in June. And everything was pretty okay. But again, it was the thick of the pandemic. My kids were home, doing school from home. We were all in this like lockdown state here. So who knows? Like I was feeling a lot of stress, and there probably was also stuff happening with perimenopause with menopause, and I just wasn't aware of it. But July 1st, almost on the button, I started getting horrendous night sweats. And that went on for about 2 weeks. And that's when I reached out to you, and we started trying to figure out what the hell was going on. At the time, we did not know I was in menopause. We sort of assumed I was still in perimenopause. We assumed I may get another period, really, because it was early stages. And so you were doing that hormone chasing thing, and we tried different things, and some things worked for a while, but then probably my hormones, something shifted again and it didn't work anymore. And I ended up finding a product with your help. And listen, I want to just be clear. We say this all the time in this podcast. We cannot provide any advice to anybody listening to this podcast, obviously. We're just talking about our own experience here, and I'm not recommending anything to anyone. What we always recommend is that if you're struggling with this stuff, go see somebody, go see a qualified practitioner, whether that's your medical doctor or a naturopathic doctor. Talk to somebody about what's going on, and then get some direction from someone who knows what they're doing. Because I think, Sarah, do you agree with me on this? It feels like hormones are the worst thing to try to treat yourself.
Well, they often, a lot of women have, there's some decent combination products out there that many women have tried by the time they show up in my office.
That aren't really harmful. They're not harmful. They're sort of,
they're innocuous enough that, the health food stores can sell them, and they're, it's kind of scattershot approach, right? It kind of like, we're hoping to treat this symptom, right? So they're not all bad, that's for sure. Now in Canada, we have the Natural Health Products Directorate, which I think is still called that. Anyways, they give an identification number, like a drug identification number, to every product, which means that what's in the bottle is in the bottle, and that there are some studies to back up the claims, and they're not allowed to make claims around the health benefits without, having a certain degree of evidence.
Right.
That is, so I don't know about Europe, but that does not happen in the US.
Okay.
So when people are ordering products online from the US, you cannot be guaranteed that you're necessarily getting what you're getting. I'm not saying that that's across the board, but so I'm always looking for companies that I trust and products that I trust, and if possible that they have an identification number. I know that you can order hormones off the internet. That I'm not in favor of at all. That would be the area where I would say do not mess with that on your own.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of what I was talking about too. Like anything that it has the potential to really change your hormones, I guess. So this, what I was and the reason I said that is because the product that I ended up taking is it's a maca product. I do order it from the States. I'm still taking it now. It made an incredible difference to me, but it took a very long time for it to happen. And I almost gave up hope 1,000 times, as I had told you along the way. And I had to really experiment and talk to you. And I also talked to the naturopath at the company that makes this supplement about what the right dosage and kind of plan for me was. So it took a very long time for it to actually have a positive impact. And what that has done is level me out during the days and the early evenings. That's really been the benefit of the maca. It has helped me to not have hot flashes during the day very often, although I'm going to talk about that because they're back. But for a long time, I didn't have them. And I'm also not having any like early evening night sweats anymore. So, for a long time there, I was waking up in full sweats at like 11:30, 12:30, 2:30, 4, 5:30, 6:30 kind of thing. Like I was having them all night long. But the maca kind of took away all of the sweats up until the first one at like 1:30 or so that I could get a pretty decent stretch of sleep in from maybe 10 o'clock until 1. Every night. So I could get like 3 or 4 hours usually without a night sweat, which was just a huge relief to me because I was sleep deprived basically. Well, I've been sleep deprived all year, Sarah, but I was really sleep deprived there for about 6 months. So that's been really great for me. Unfortunately, what's happened is in the last couple of months, the maca just doesn't seem to be doing it like it was doing it. And I also had developed some new symptoms. So other than the symptom of the night sweats and the heat and the sleep disturbance, I also started to notice that my joints were just killing me. So I'm a really active person. I go to the gym about 5 times a week, usually, without fail. And I was just starting to note, and I pay attention to my body, so I know how I feel. And if I sit for too long and I stand up, my knees are aching. It's hard for me to like unpretzel myself if I pretzel myself, if that makes sense, which is something I do all the time. Like I sit on the couch with my knees under me. It's just hard. And then the other issue that I'm struggling with and that I really want to talk about on this podcast, because I don't think we talk about this ever. And I think it's really important that women know that this happens to a lot of women in menopause, is something called vaginal atrophy. And we do have a question about that we're going to deal with in the next segment. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to mention it. It's basically just the drying out of the tissue, the vaginal tissues, not vaginal, vaginal tissues. Did I ever think I would be doing a podcast where I was talking about my vaginal tissues? No, I did not. But I think it's important that we talk about this because it just like dries out, right? Because you don't have the estrogen there to keep those tissues healthy. And that can lead to discomfort for women. I mean, you can speak more about all the other symptoms, but I can tell you that it definitely it's painful. So it can make it really painful to have intercourse. And so that is something that I have now been talking about it with other women. And I'm amazed at how many of my friends are saying, oh yeah, no, that's happening to me too. Mm-hmm. The good news on that front is there are lots of different ways to address that. I've learned through research and talking to you, but I have actually found something that is really quite fantastic. And it's basically a suppository type moisturizer. And it's just like fixed the issue for me. So that's what I've been using, and it's fantastic. And I was so relieved when that happened, when I found relief from that. Like it was just so great to not have that issue, because man, it makes you feel old to have all this stuff, to go from, being 48 and everything's great and you're working out every day and you feel fantastic and you're sleeping and you're killing it, with your business and your kids and all of that. And you feel like, oh, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel here, to like all of a sudden you can't get out of a chair.
Yeah.
You feel like you're 80 years old.
Yeah.
And you've got friggin' vaginal atrophy going on, right? Anyway, there are lots of things you can do for that. And I found a remedy that's just been amazing for me, and it's a non-hormonal remedy, which I like. So it's a more natural remedy. It's just hyaluronic acid and water. I did have issues with the idea of putting acid in that region of my body. I will say that, but it's the same hyaluronic acid that's in like these fancy, expensive face creams, by the way. So we are already using it already, many of us. So anyway, those were kind of my big symptoms. But now this joint pain and the vaginal issues, which I do think I have resolved now. And then the kind of the ramping up again of those nighttime symptoms for me, where I am now not sleeping nearly as well as I was a few months ago, and the exhaustion that comes with that, and the real difficulty focusing that sometimes happens for me, which is hard because I'm constantly on during the day. I mean, I'm either working with clients one-on-one, I'm running group programming, or I'm doing presentations and podcasts, and I need to be focused. I don't have a lot of time to get distracted, or be trying to work with brain fog. Who does, really, right? So all of that stuff has caused me to start exploring other options for dealing with this, because the thought of being this way for another 40 years is really overwhelming for me, and I don't want it. And so you and I have been having some really great conversations about bioidentical hormone therapy. I'm starting to explore it, and I've done a lot of research on my own about that. And that's a conversation that I know both you and I want to start having on this podcast, because so many women are like I was last year, terrified of the idea of any form of hormone therapy because of the fear that this will cause cancer. That's the main fear that I had. And I think that's the main fear that the women that I talk to have about any kind of hormone therapy. And so you and I have done a lot of research this year, and I've spent a lot of time looking into it. And there's so much more to this than that, you guys. It's first of all, this is not your mother's hormone therapy, right, Sarah?
No.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we'll talk about that later, but that's where I am right now. And I don't want to talk too much about my experiences with that, because I'm just at the very beginning stages trying to figure out what bioidentical hormone therapy might be the right thing for me, and whether it's going to help with these symptoms or not. It may be something that I try and stay on. It may be something that I try and realize it's not the right thing for me. I don't know. So I don't want to talk too much about it right now, but that's kind of where I'm at. And I am currently not sleeping again. So I'm back to not sleeping, and I'm having, these night sweats again, like 4 or 5 times a night, which is tough. So that's really been my experience with it. So I'm feeling less celebratory about my Menoversary. I was saying to Sarah privately before we started this, it felt like a really great idea to do this like celebration episode like months ago when I was feeling great from the maca. I felt like I had this thing under control. Now I'm kind of like less festive, let's say, about about the fact that it's my Menoversary. Oh man, it is.
So I'll cancel the mariachi band I ordered for your
cancel
mariachi. I don't know.
Cancel the band and the strippers. No
Yeah.
strippers. I don't want any male strippers. Cancel it all. Oh man. Anyway, so that's kind of been my experience, and we'll see where this all goes. I mean, the one other thing I wanted to talk about, Sarah, on this episode is what we have noticed. And I don't know the answer to this for you, but I know the answer to me. And I think I kind of know what you're going to say about this, but I want to talk about some of the shifts that have happened for us emotionally and mentally as a result of moving into closer to menopause, and probably for both of us now into full menopause, like just our own experience with that. So do you know what I mean by that question, or you want me to answer it first?
I think I know what you mean, but
Yeah,
go ahead. You can go ahead, or do you want, okay. Well, I can also talk about that.
Go for it. Go. You're on.
Gosh, can I talk about it? Along with that feeling of calm comes also a feeling of being a little bit more grounded and sure in the world. So, and actually caring less about what people think. This is that for me has been, I guess, surprising in some ways, in that it's, I've watched it happen with lots of patients, and I've had that kind of feeling about, kind of a, like, I don't care anymore. I'm 45, and I it's hard to articulate. I don't, I just don't, I'm just not as worried about the small stuff anymore.
Yeah. Well, we always say,
I
you
mean,
and I always say, we have no more fucks left to give.
yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say next, basically, which is just like, there's kind of like I sort of noticed in my mid 40s, it was more like a more aggressive kind of feeling. It was more like, I don't have to put up with this shit anymore. I'm 45, that kind of feeling. But now it's more like, I actually don't care.
Yeah.
I actually, just doesn't resonate with me anymore to invest that much energy into what other people think or what they're doing, or, obviously I'm conscientious and kind and all of those things, but in terms of the stuff that doesn't serve me, I just don't have the time and the space to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
And that sounds a little bit harsh, but it's actually, it really is like, whatever. I'm a 50-year-old woman. Like, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
I've earned this, and I have and I also have a tremendous amount of wisdom with this age.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other question that kind of flows directly from that is, have you noticed any shifts in terms of your, I guess creativity is one word, but maybe like just your motivation in relation to work, or, you know what I'm getting at here? Because you and I have talked about this, but yeah.
So, I mean, I've talked, I think in the first podcast or the second one, I talked about that sort of second chakra shift around the energy, the creative energy turning inwards rather than being outward and looking after everybody else. And so what's happened with me is that I've recognized that I want to put some of my energy that I was putting into work and seeing patients directly into sort of more creative pursuits. And so, not necessarily separate from work, but for example, I'm writing a book, and we're gonna do this course together. We're gonna put together a course. There's kind of like, I now find that I have a different kind of energy as and my kids are getting older, so I'm able to pull back from the sort of constant nurturing.
Yeah.
And I'm applying it to projects that make me feel more, I don't know, it's like generating creativity. And so, I've been trying to write this book for almost a decade when I look back at my notes, and I was just never able to apply the right kind of energy and the amount of time to do it. And so now I can sit down, take 3 hours every Sunday and sit down and, throw out a whole bunch of creative stuff, because it's like that energy's come back to me almost. It's like it was out there for a long time, and now it's come back to me. I bought myself a sketchbook. When I bought my kids sketchbooks the other day, I thought, I'm going to buy one for me. Whereas, 2 or 3 years ago, it would have all been all about them. Right? Like, just like get stuff for them. And then I was thinking, I'm going to get myself a sketchbook.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a shift, and it feels like part of my brain and my creative center is waking up in a way that, like, if you and I had the conversation about creating the course, for example, if we'd had that 2 years ago, I probably would have just shut down, because I did not have the emotional or sort of generational energy to put into it. But now it feels a little overwhelming, but also very exciting. So there's that space is opened up.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because I mean, as the person, we are going to talk about this course, by the way. We should talk about it because nobody has any idea what we're talking about. So we'll talk about that.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about it in a second. This is the perfect time to kind of start talking about it. But I think I raised this idea of a course with you quite a while ago, and your initial response to it was not super positive, because I think you were still. It's interesting though, just the timing of what's happened to you over the last year, even with this, because you were, resistant. I don't have enough time. I'm overwhelmed. I have all this, you're so busy with stuff, and it just didn't like catch with you. I don't think the first maybe time or second time, maybe even that I raised it. And I think that as you have moved through this year, I've seen a shift in you, which has been interesting for me to watch around it, in that you're kind of reclaiming, you know, reclaiming, yes, this creativity, but also, and I don't think there's any shame in saying this, I think you're reclaiming this, like, no, it's my time and I should be able to build a business that I love and that I'm proud of. And I should be able to, you know, do the things that I want to do as a female person. And this has been the biggest thing for me that I've noticed that's shifted in the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I have a difficult time separating menopause and becoming alcohol free, because to me, they both did the same thing for me. So leaving alcohol behind opened up a bajillion possibilities for me. It allowed me to become a far more confident person. And that gave me, it also freed up time and mental space, and all of this amazing stuff came with that for me. And I've used that to do a lot more creative things than I would have done before. Like I always say, this podcast is brought to you by freedom from alcohol and menopause, because I think the two things together have allowed me to take back some of this, reclaim some of this for myself. And, you know, I realized, like, my husband got to build his business. He did it from when he started the business at the age of, I think he was 29 or 30 when he started it. And, you know, now he's the same age as me. He's 50. So for the last 20 years, he's been building that thing, and he's done a great job of it. And you should be very proud of it. And he's had tons of success in it, and, you know, been able to celebrate all of that success. I have not had the same thing. Yes, I have accomplished a lot, but I left my career in law, and because I was burnt out, because I was trying to raise 2 tiny people and also be a partner in this very busy, huge law firm. And that was just too much for me, doing something I didn't love. And then I spent 10 years in a fairly modest practice, not 10 years, maybe 8 years in a fairly modest practice, where I was able to arrange my client hours around my kids' schedules so that I could do, and that's what I wanted at the time. So I don't regret that. And I'm not resentful of it or anything, but it just is what it is. And I think for a lot of women, that's what happens in our 30s and early 40s. We recognize we cannot do all the things in the way that we want to do all the things, and that we have to kind of put a few things on the back burner, and our priorities shift during that decade or so. And then they shift again. And that's was the biggest thing for me in my 40s, is that my early 40s, I was definitely still in full parenting mode. But a few years ago, when I stopped drinking, also, I think coincided with, you know, my kids were 13, I think, at the time. So they're starting to become pretty independent. And on top of that, my estrogen was coming down. And so I just wasn't feeling as nurturing towards everyone else. And that energy, I think, was starting to come back and turn inward. So that's been the biggest shift that I have noticed in the last few years. And I think it's worth celebrating. I mean, that is the piece that I am happy to celebrate today. Like, I'm never going to go back to perimenopause. I feel pretty, I should stop saying that. I have 2 weeks left. It could still happen.
God forbid.
I don't think it's going to happen. The hormone test results indicate it's not going to happen. But anyway, you know, I think it is worth celebrating the fact that I have, you know, confidence in where I am now, at least hormonally. I know where I am. There's some finality and certainty to it. And that allows me to just, you know, really embrace this whole idea of, this is my time. These people don't need me anymore. They're 17 years old. They can do all the things themselves. I obviously am still a very active parent, and I love my children. I don't want to suggest that I'm not involved with them and nurturing them, but it's not the same. It doesn't feel like this visceral physical drive to take care of everybody like it did when I was in my 30s. So, and early 40s. That's the best way that I can describe it.
I think one of the gifts of the transition from, like, if you can embrace the perimenopausal transition and then get to the other side, I think one of the gifts is self-awareness.
Yeah,
I really do. I think that if you've been fortunate enough to have somebody teach you about what's happening in your body, or you've, you know, done your own research and actually really kind of dived in.
I know, dived. I think dived.
Yeah, dived in. And kind of, as much as you can, just kind of recognize that this is a transition, and you know, it's basically puberty with wisdom.
Oh, that's nice.
And that, nice. Yeah. And so, and on the other side comes a self-awareness, you know, and hard won. right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that self-awareness can be hard won, but on the, there's a self-awareness about, okay, well, what do I actually need? Like I'm 52, I could live. My mother's 80. Her relatives were 90, 95 when they died. So, I've got another 30, 35 years. What do I want that to actually look like? And I feel like I now actually have the space to put the energy into creating that. Whereas all of my energy was going into creating, people and careers and volunteer things and community around me, and all of these things were going into that. And now it's like, meh, I just don't know if I want to be on that board anymore. And I don't want to, I just want to focus my energies on the things that I want to do now. And that's not selfish.
No, it's not.
That's the big thing, right? So we're often schooled societally to be to feel that when we take care of ourselves that we're selfish, and even though intellectually you may think that's rubbish, it's kind of in the body, right? And so I find that a lot of women, myself included, have to struggle with that. Like, no, I actually need to do this for myself, and I want to do this for myself. This is sort of the ultimate time for me to be moving into this.
Yep, I hear you. All right, well, before we wrap this episode up, this will be a continuing saga, by the way. My Meno story is not over yet. I can tell you that for sure. Maybe Sarah's is, mine's not. Before we wrap this up, though, we should probably tell people what we're talking about with this course. So we're not going to give you any real details yet because we don't have them, but we are very excited about this. So we're putting together something, and it's going to be really great. We're not quite sure exactly what it's going to be yet. It will be a combination of teaching and coaching, and we will both be equally involved in it. So Sarah and I are going to put together a program. It's going to be focused and directed at very busy women in perimenopause and menopause who are feeling some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. So we're going to kind of do a burnout and hormonal program, and we don't have a name for it. It's a mashup, but it's going to be fantastic because between the two of us, I think hopefully this has been evident in these episodes and in the other podcast episodes, maybe where I've just been doing my own stuff. We have a lot of experience and expertise around these issues. And, my specialty is helping professional and executive women come back from burnout and deal with unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol and food. And Sarah's her wheelhouse is women's hormonal health. And so I think this is really going to be a fantastic pairing. And we're going to be able to offer with this really important to both of us that there's some element of coaching. So there may be different ways to access this material. We may end up having a self-guided course, but then also a group, live kind of coaching and teaching version of this course. We're not sure yet, but it is happening and we're very excited about it. And we will be sharing the details with you as soon as we get this mapped out. Our plan is to spend a weekend together kind of brainstorming and starting to really create a roadmap for this course and what it's going to look like in the next, I think we're hoping to do it next month. So anyway, that's exciting news and that's coming up, but I think that's it for us today. So I will end. I'm not going to sing again. Happy Menoversary, my friend.
Thank you. Same to you.
May the next half of your life be rich and rewarding and highly creative, and may your body temperature regulate itself. That's my wish for you.
Oh, mine is for you as well.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a certified Naked Mind coach, I help busy women like you find freedom from alcohol. If you're starting to question your relationship with alcohol, you'll want to listen to my free 3-part video series where I address the top 3 myths around why you think you need to drink. Sign up now at www.wendymccallum.com/myths. That's www.wendymccallum.com menopauseandperimenopause.com/myths.